we have Marilyn's husband James, who was a struggling man in his late 40s and doing what you would expect a man in that position to be doing. Having an affair. It's been a really long time since I filmed one of these videos, so I'm just going to get straight to it. Here are all of the books I've read so far in 2021. Starting with Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This has already had a little bit of buzz on BookTube because it was the group read for a BookTube-a-thon. This is the story of Amira, who's babysitting for Alex, and while she's at the supermarket, she's apprehended by the police, who thinks she's kidnapping that child. A guy steps in and records this incident for her, so she has the power over the situation. And luckily it's diffused and she really doesn't want that footage to go anywhere. So we follow both Amira and Alex, the mother of said child, as they navigate their relationship. Alex being super invested in something happening between them and them forming a bond, whereas Amira's dreams are very different, and not only do they have this child that's linking them, but also someone from Alex's past that might be in Amira's future. Behind me is my Notion setup where I have been recording my thoughts on books throughout this year rather than filming them, so I'll be referring to this. This book hits a lot of my buzzwords, and the first one is motherhood. I've come to the realization that that's basically an auto-read buzzword for me. When I reflected on some of my favorite books that I've read over the last 2 years, they all had certain things in common, and motherhood was basically the number one. Part of motherhood that we're exploring in this book is the idea of neglect, and what is good and bad mothering, and how that translates to social media, and mums having lives separate to their kids. And then with the babysitter angle, it's like how other people can step in and take care of your children maybe better than you do, and the jealousy that's formed from that dynamic. Not only does this have a racial divide between Amira and Alex, it also has the economic divide of Alex being this super rich blogger mum and Amira being a struggling student who's living with friends and just wondering what jobs are going to get her to where she wants to be in the future. So I really enjoyed this like struggling girl in her 20s narrative too, because that's so very relatable to me right now. And I really enjoyed Amira's friend group as well. I think that's something that I would like to read whole books about, just friend groups of women in their like early mid-20s. So if you have any recommendations for those, then pop them in the comments below, please. And the other buzzword I've categorized this under is a now and then narrative. So it flops back and forth a little bit between the past and the present, mostly to give us context for things with the relationship with this man, and I don't want to give away things. But I was surprised by the links that it had, and that made it a book that was really difficult to put down. But I did find that the final chapter did too much to reduce Alex's character. It left her more as this stereotype scheming woman rather than this nuanced person who has complex feelings. I wasn't happy with the ending. Like, I was left like, ugh. But luckily that didn't have too much of a negative impact on my feelings about the book overall. I still thought it was really fun about the digital age and women's relationships with each other. One of my absolute favourite books from last year was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and if you liked that, then I think this is worth a read too. Speaking of Celeste Ng, I have Everything I Never Told You, which is her debut book. I think this went around on BookTube when it came out as a YA book because it does follow the daughter and the son. It's about Lydia, who is like 16, and it's a question of, did she kill herself or was she murdered, when her body is dragged out from a lake. But it's not just about teenagers, because it's mostly about the parents. I really love a generational story, so we follow each member of the family. The mother, who has her own troublesome relationship with her own mother and how that has affected her relationship with Lydia. Literally, I eat that stuff up. Those sections were my favourite. Then we have Marilyn's husband James, who was a struggling crisis going through man in his late 40s and doing what you would expect a man in that position to be doing. Having an affair. The thing I really love about this author's writing though is that even when you have characters who do irreprehensible things, you don't immediately fall down against them. Like, she really makes a point of showing you how they got to this position, so you can kind of see how things turned out the way that they did. She's never imposing opinions on you. Like, you walk out of her books different to how someone else has based on your own opinions and your own morals. So even though reading about adultery is possibly my least favourite thing, I was surprised how emotionally engaged I was anyway. I didn't completely write James off from the very beginning, just based on the fact of his actions. Then we follow Nathan, who's the younger brother of Lydia and closest in age, and how he's grappling with his sister's death, and the confusing, mysterious boy across the street, Jack, who may or may not have had something to do with it in his eyes. And then we have Hannah, the youngest daughter, who's very much overlooked by her parents. She's quite a bit younger than her other two siblings, and she just wants to be noticed. Reading this after Little Fires Everywhere, you could really see ideas that she wanted to like pick up on in her future books, and I think siblings is probably going to be one of the things that she continually explores. Jimin just posted. Yeah, okay. We'll look at that here. Hey! Race is another huge part of this novel, them being a Chinese-American family, and how that affects all of them differently. You see it from everyone's perspective, and particularly for the parents who reflect on it when they were young based on their kids living now. It's just that this is full of so many interesting ideas. Her prose is detailed and full of flashbacks and sentimentality that it feels like you're kind of wading through a memoir, but I really enjoy that style. She's definitely an auto-bi author now, though I do have to say that I liked Little Fires Everywhere a little bit more than this one, but I think that's just because it packs a bit more of a punch and the plot is maybe like a bit tighter. It's not as meandering as this one could be at times. Then we have The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and I read this in anticipation of the adaptation, which is an Amazon thing, I think. Like it came out this month in May, and I'm very looking forward to watching it, because the one thing I didn't particularly like about this is that it was told in third person. I really feel like a first person perspective would have got us deeper into Cora's emotions. The Underground Railroad imagines there to be an actual physical railroad that transported escaped slaves across the country. The book is split into loads of parts, so you follow lots of different characters, but Cora's the character that you follow all the way through. So you learn about her mother's experience of slavery and then her escape and her trying to survive later on, as well as the people who help her and the people who hunt her. It was heavy to read and heart-pounding at times, and I found the most vivid sections to be the beginning and then when she was staying in the attic of the white couple. Then I read How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran, and Maddie has already talked about this, but I liked it just as much too. I think I enjoyed the first maybe 100 pages more than the rest of it, but I do have the sequel, so I plan to continue, and I know there's also a film adaptation which I think is going to be very different to the book, but I'm still interested in watching it anyway. So I won't talk about this one too much because Maddie's basically already covered it, so I'll leave her video in the cards, and I had very much the same opinions. Next I have Winter by Ali Smith, and I listened to the audiobook of this as soon as Maddie finished it because she said it was so beautiful, and I agree. It also helps that the narrator had such an amazing voice. It felt like a bedtime story. And again, this sort of like intergenerational dynamic is something that has come up in some of the books I've mentioned already, so that's another one of my buzzwords I've discovered, and I just really enjoyed the writing. It was the perfect mix of straightforward and poetic. It juggles this like choppy timeline really well, so you never lose the point of things. Like I love books where they've got like the linear narrative, but then it goes back to the past so that things in the like future present of what you're about to read can be illuminated in different ways, and I think that is what this book did. I have really been loving audiobooks this year. They have boosted my reading productivity exponentially, and one that as soon as I saw it I was like, I'm putting this above everything else, is Kim Ji-young Born 1982 by Cho Nam-ju. This book made me angry in all of the right ways. So the audio is told with a man's voice, and throughout the whole thing I was like, why isn't this going against the point? And then you get to the end, the whole book is a device of her therapist talking, and suddenly everything made sense, and then I was just filled with a fiery like ball of rage sat right in my throat. Like I needed a lot of cool off time, and I was speaking about it with friends who had read it and just like shaking my fist because it's so shocking and really shows the whole point of this book, that even though change can happen and things have been put in place so that they can, the reality is that it's not. This follows Kim Ji-young, which is the most popular women's name I think in Korea for that year, so it creates this character of the every woman, so you can really read yourself into her role. Again, it's got that family element of going through the generations, and it's about her oppression and her experience of being a woman in South Korea. I would really like to do more reading on this topic. I don't want this book to just be the only thing that I refer to. Next I read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I read this mostly as like part of the feminist reading list canon. I think she is lacking a lot of intersectionality, and whilst I haven't really read a lot more around the topic, I just wanted to read the source text first. I can imagine that I think I've heard that people don't really like her politics anymore, but still you can't deny the impact that this book had, and so I wanted to read it firsthand rather than taking other people's opinions on it. But I agree, like it's lacking. So it's just mostly about her experiences with feminism as a Nigerian woman. It's not a book that I've formed all of my opinions on yet, but I think it's instrumental to my education on the topic. The next book I have to talk about is Winter in Sokcho by Eliza Shua Dusapin. This is a French-Korean author and is a translated work. It is a beautifully short novel at about 150 pages, so I read it in one sitting. And it's one of those books that's just going to stay with me forever, I think. Reading it, I was so there. In Sokcho, which is a town on the border between North and South Korea, and we follow our unnamed protagonist, which isn't a device that I usually like, as she's working in a hotel out of season with a few odd guests, and she's never been to the viewpoint where you can see into North Korea, and she's struggling with a relationship with her boyfriend who wants to become a model and is moving to Seoul. She went to university in Seoul, so she's got this like, I have been in the city, now I'm in the countryside, and she has an interesting relationship with her mother. Are we seeing a trend here? Yeah, it's just about like all these little things that kind of feel like a Ghibli movie where it's like so much is happening, but it's all about like minute relationships and the facsimile of life. And it's also about art as well, because there's a French man who's staying at this hotel that she becomes like enamored feels too strong, but she's fascinated by him and his art. And I guess it wouldn't be too much to say that she becomes a muse for him. A very quiet, unassuming novel, but about so much. About the beauty industry, about art and the artist, purpose in life as well even. Like, do you need to have big dreams or can you be content with where you are? I'm giving it 5 stars. Haven't heard a single other person talk about it ever. Then we have Final Girls by Riley Sager, and don't be fooled, even though I have a physical book of this, I listened to the audiobook. I do feel, however, that it would have been better if I'd read it physically, because then I could have skipped my way through some of the more bland parts of the plot, let's say. So this follows 3 final girls, and final girls, if you're not aware, is the term for the girls who survive horrific murder sprees. They're the ones that manage to escape. And our lead, Quincy, is one of those girls, and she has created a very successful social media presence for herself. And she's in contact with 2 other final girls in the States, and then one of them mysteriously commits suicide, and she's not convinced that it is suicide. I found this to be straight up boring in some parts. Like, it really doesn't pick up until 2/3 of the way into the novel, when the 3rd final girl, Samantha, comes to New York to find Quincy and talk to her. Every question, who's posted now? I think that's Zoa. Zoa from Weekly has posted. We'll see that here. And I have to admit that I wasn't too shocked by the ending. I think because when you're given a cast of characters, the murderer or the actual perpetrator isn't going to be someone that you've never known before. And I found the motivation behind it a little bit lacking. So yeah, this was underwhelming, we'll go with. Then we go to my final audiobook that I have to talk about, and that is Inconvenient Daughter by Lauren J. Sharkey. I accessed this on Scribd, and I only read it because they'd sliced down my access to what feels like 1%, and I think this was a Scribd original, and that's basically all I can read until the next month of subscription now. But I can't be too mad at it because I actually did enjoy it. I feel like it's a story with 2 distinct sections. So you've got like the coming of age beginning, and then you've got rape aftermath, which if you're not prepared for going into is a little bit of a whiplash. So trigger warnings for like on the page abusive relationship that's very troubling and kind of traumatic to read about. It's not wholly unforegrounded, as chopped up between this coming of age is flash forwards to her trying to get an appointment with some doctors after the event. The ending contextualizes all of those points, so you can see it coming, but somehow you go so deep back into her history of childhood and adolescence that you kind of forget that it's coming. First and foremost, this is about a mother-daughter relationship. Are we surprised? No. This follows Rowan, who's adopted from South Korea, Korea by white parents in the USA. Goes through her regular coming-of-age teenagerhood in the 80s. I really enjoyed these sections. It felt very much like Lady Bird, the film with Saoirse Ronan. I thought this book would deal more with race, but Rowan doesn't really want to connect with her Korean heritage, so this isn't that story. There's another one on Scribd, I think, called Famous Adopted People, which has a similar premise but is more about reconnecting with the birth mother. But still, I enjoyed this one. It was well worth a read, so thank you and no thank you, Scribd. Very last book I have to talk about is the Nakano Thrift Shop by Hitomi Kawakami. I'm really into short books right now, and this was like 260 pages. But I did find that it took me a little bit longer to read, mostly because it's quite meandering. I don't know why. I thought this was going to be a little bit more whimsical, maybe with some magical realism elements in it. I guess that's just what I expect from this like thrift shop setting. And I wouldn't say it's a coming of age either, because she's slightly older and isn't grappling with anything in her life to do with her career necessarily. It's more about her relationships with men. This is a book that I really wanted to like more than I did, but I just found that it was too quiet for me. Like, it didn't give me anything to really think about too much. I didn't come away from it feeling anything. Sounds bad. It's told through a series of vignettes, I would say. I think the way that each story wrapped up, you could almost leave it just reading single sections, and I think that is kind of what stopped me from pushing through, and it took me a lot longer to read considering it's only short. So there you have it. Those are all of the books I've read so far this year, and that totals 3,235 pages, which I'm pretty pleased with. Reading I am slowly getting back into thanks to audiobooks, and I really wish I'd discovered them sooner. Thank you for listening to what I've been reading recently. Let me know what you've been reading, or if you have any recommendations based on the things that I've liked, and if you've read any of the books that I've talked about, I'd love to know, and look forward to more regular updates from me in the future. See you next time. Bye!